every child is so different, and different approaches work differently for different children. A lot of parenting is kind of figuring out what works for your child.
Welcome, Cara, to our episode of Pinot and Parenting. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd love to start off by having you share a little bit more about yourself and just who you are, what you're doing in the world.
So I'm Dr. Cara Goodwin. I'm a child psychologist and a mother to 3 young kids. I had been a child psychologist in the world of research and seeing clients and for therapy and assessments, and was really deep into the child development research. And then I became a mother myself, and I would be talking to my other mom friends, and I was always so surprised that even my friends who were mostly highly educated were not aware of all the parenting research that's out there. So after becoming a mom myself, I had this idea to help to take all the research that's out there on parenting and to translate it for the average parent to use in their everyday life. As a researcher myself, I know that, so much money and effort goes into these research studies. And, if it's not reaching the people who really need it, which in this case is parents, what is the whole point? And also, I think for parents, we have, as a parent myself, I know we have so many questions about what is the right thing to do. And there is actually some research that gives us some guidance. So I think, as a parent, it helps, to be more confident in your decisions, knowing, what the research says works.
I love that. And I can definitely relate to that on a personal level as well, because I felt a lot of the same things that you're talking about, that even becoming a little bit overwhelmed myself when I look at what's on social media and the popular press, even coming with a research background, right? It's hard to sometimes discern what is based in research versus maybe opinion or experience. So thank you.
I completely agree. That was another reason that I wanted to, start this organization, which I've called Parenting Translator, because I saw all this stuff on social media, and a lot of it, will even say research claims this. And I'm like, whoa, that's not what research says. So, a lot of people will talk about the brain to make it seem more official. It is really hard to kind of discern what is accurate and what is not, and who should I trust. And it's hard for us, especially because a lot of us don't have, our extended family around guiding us and kind of telling us what their experience was with parenting. So we look to things like social media.
Most definitely. And I think that that's very true, especially, for millennial parents that are spending a lot more time on social media, and that's where they're kind of gathering their information. And so I'm really excited to kind of dive into our topic today, which is like a myth busting topic. And so I guess the first myth busting or topic that I want to ask you about is this one size fits all approach on parenting and what we see on Instagram specifically. So can you kind of tell us more what you're seeing, and let's do some myth busting.
Yeah, definitely. So, what I see on social media is there are all these different like schools of parenting. It's almost like religions. You see the gentle parenting, you see attachment parenting, you see, for a lack of a better term, I'll call it old school parenting, like the do as I say approach. And I think people feel like, they have to choose one and stick to it as if it is a religion, that you have to buy into every single aspect of this type of parenting. And from the different types of parenting I've seen online, I haven't found one that I'm like, yes, this exactly matches what I see in the research. Some of them, I think all of them actually have some evidence-based aspects to them, but a lot of times, I'm like, we don't really have any research showing that. And, there's not a single one that I'm like, yes, this is 100% right. And I think the other issue that you brought up is that these different parenting, approaches on Instagram, they present it as, this is exactly what you should do. This is the exact script that you should say to your child. And once you do that, you'll have no more tantrums. And it's kind of like, well, what we know from the research is that, every child is so different, and different approaches work differently for different children. Particularly for the neurodiverse kids, that means children with ADHD and autism, it is a different approach that you're going to want to use. And when we say this one size fits all, we're making it difficult for parents when it doesn't work for their child. They're going to feel like they maybe failed, they didn't do it right, when, a lot of parenting is kind of figuring out what works for your child.
Something to, but while you're thinking, just what you were saying made me think was, there's also so much research out there sort of thinking about temperament, right? And all these different individual characteristics of children.
Yes.
And I feel like a lot of the research studies now are actually thinking about that, even in the context of sort of randomized controlled trials. And really, the research world is delving into more how individual difference plays out. But I don't necessarily see that coming out when things are presented in more popular venues.
Yes, that's so true. Is that, it's becoming more and more common in research, more recently, to look at individual differences and what works differently for different children, because the research world is about, when we find out about it takes about 17 years from when research is published for it to reach the people that need it. You could think, if this is only recently a trend in the research world, that it's taking a while to reach parents.
So I think one of the things I wanted to talk a little bit more about too, in this one size fits all approach, is this: it creates a lot more anxiety, no matter what kind of, despite child temperament or maybe a specific disability. But it's creating more anxiety, and it's creating and reinforcing this idea of dichotomous thinking, this all or nothing approach. Like, it has to be this way and it cannot be this way, and that you're creating damage, and then it instills fear in parents. That, I think, is what's really scary on social media, is because these are coming from actual professionals, right, that are saying this. And there's this kind of discussion back and forth about which approach is better. And so, it's not really about what one size fits all approach. It's, again, going back to your point of, well, what are the strategies that we know work, and how can I apply it in my particular situation? Because we know context is important. And then, because I know from personal experience, and I know that both of you probably feel the same, is my daughter responds really well to a specific set of approaches that I use, and my son is the complete opposite, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And so I think I want parents to know that don't believe everything you see on social media, right? Really dive in and think about what feels good to you, but also, like, what does the evidence really say? So what can you share with parents about that? How do they find high quality evidence?
That's a great question. And I think, a big reason I started my account is because it is so difficult to find evidence, the research, and to figure out how to interpret the research. I always suggest to parents, you can look up the actual research articles. A great source for that is Google Scholar. And a big problem, though, is a lot of the articles are behind a paywall, which is a huge problem, because, if we as parents cannot access the research that is impacting us, how are we supposed to, make these decisions? So that's a big reason why I wanted to start Parenting Translator, is because it is so hard to access these articles. And then, even if you do access the actual article, what parent has time to read and interpret this? And even with, I have PhD in child psychology. And even with that training, some of these articles, like I have to really sit down and focus on, these are dense articles. And it's hard to interpret, with all the jargon and everything, what exactly this is saying about my everyday parenting. So I think it's really hard. I think something to look for is what are, for on social media, for example, what are the person's credentials? Do they have any sort of license to provide clinical services? Do they have any sort of graduate training in this? And if it's not clear from their page, I would ask and try to figure out what are these person's credentials, because I do think interpreting research is so complicated that it does take some degree of training. And, particularly if somebody is trying to sell something, I would be really worried about, okay, does this person actually have the expertise to be discussing something like this?
I liked Cara's point, but this is just, we don't have to include it. That even as a researcher, it's like so hard to read these articles these days. Everything's so dense. And what's like rewarded for a peer-reviewed journal article sometimes is exactly what makes it very hard to access, I feel like, as a parent.
It is, you know what, the research is dense. I was just reading an article in terms of this idea of attachment science and theory and behaviorism, and how they're trying to integrate the two approaches, which hasn't really been done. And I was just thinking that article was really, really dense for me. And you have to have a really good understanding of principles of behavior to be able to like sift through that information, because, since I've been on social media, I'm like, where is all of this parenting debate really coming from? And I'm starting to gather that it's coming from the research itself, right? And these different philosophies, in terms of attachment theory and science versus behavioral sciences. And so it's a really interesting article to kind of see how are we using both of the sciences to come together, right, to make sense of child development and parenting approaches and how they impact us later as adults.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And I think that that's an issue that I see on social media. It seems like attachment theory versus behavioral theory, when both, there's research supporting both, and you can take something from attachment theory and something from behavioral theory and use both at the same time with your child. So it's a lot more complicated in real life and in the research than it appears on social media. I think all parents experience that. It's like, well, the person on social media, so this would immediately end the tantrum, and it just doesn't work that way in real life.
It's very true. It's very true.
So something that I find to be really interesting that seems to be a debate, particularly on social media, but in other popular press venues as well, is this idea of punishment versus consequences. And I'm really curious to get your take on sort of what's going on there and what's research-based versus maybe not.
Yes. So, there's a lot I see on social media that, we've kind of swung back from the old school method of parenting, which, was children need to have consequences for their behavior or they won't learn. We've swung the other way to this idea that, consequences and punishment are harmful for children because then they'll never have this internal drive to want to do the right thing. So if we're there externally, punishing them for misbehaving, they're not going to develop this internal drive. And I think that it's important to remember in that there are always consequences for every behavior. No matter what, even if you do not do anything as a parent, there are consequences of your child's behavior. For example, if they grab a toy out of their sibling's hand and you don't do anything, they were just rewarded for that behavior because they got the toy. So, there was a consequence. It just supported a behavior you probably don't want to support. So consequences are really about. They're not about hurting our child or, showing that, like the old school style of parenting, like we'll show you what, you shouldn't have done that, show you that you are doing something that's, going to hurt your child. So they learn. The idea of consequences are you're just setting up the environment in a way that supports the behavior that you want to support. And as children do more of a particular behavior, they eventually will find it rewarding in itself. It may not be sharing with their sibling may not initially be rewarding to them because they wanted that toy. But then eventually, with time, with development, with experience with sharing, they might eventually, see their sibling smile and realize like, oh, that actually like made me feel good. But it might initially start off with you setting up, rewards for that behavior. And rewards don't necessarily have to be, here's a sticker for sharing with your sibling. It could be as simple as noticing it, being like, I noticed that you shared with your brother, and that could be a reward for the behavior. So I think consequences kind of had this bad rap, especially on social media, but I think that, consequences are out there. No matter what, it just depends on if we're using them to support the behavior we want, or we're using them to support, or they're just happening naturally and supporting behaviors we don't want.
And I think, you sort of touched on this a little bit too, but this idea of a consequence versus a punishment, and also like a punishment in a negative sense versus maybe more of a behavioral sense. If you could talk a little bit more about that, because I see a lot of it getting conflated when it's spoken about outside of the research world.
Yes. So a punishment, again, I think punishment also has this really negative connotation, but, a punishment is just any response you have as a parent that makes that behavior less likely to happen in the future. So a punishment is not, just spanking or timeout. It's anything that you do as a parent that makes it less likely to happen in the future. So the one thing we do know is that physical punishment is, A, not effective, and B, has a lot of negative long-term outcomes. So I think that's something we can be pretty clear about from the research, is that physical punishment is definitely not the way to go. But I think when it comes to other sorts of mild punishment like timeout, there is a lot of research supporting timeout. And the idea behind timeout is not, again, this, I'm going to show them that what they did was wrong, and I'm going to do something that really hurts them so they know not to do that again. The idea behind timeout is you're taking away the most powerful motivator for our children, which is our attention. And you're also taking them to a place where they, hopefully, based on your timeout location, they should not have access to toys. So you're taking away, access to toys, access to your attention. And the idea is you're just creating a consequence that will make their behavior less likely to happen. Whereas, if they hit their sibling and you're going up to them and giving them a lot of attention, and that's really the only time you give them attention, then that consequence is probably going to make that behavior more likely to occur in the future.
Yeah, thank you for breaking that down, because I think what happens is you see these flashy headlines on social media because it works with the algorithm, right? Like parents are going to click on it and it's going to get pushed out to more and more people, right? And so there's that piece of that. But then what parents don't know is, well, how is it really defined in the research? How are researchers looking at it, defining it, and studying it? Because punishers also include a verbal reprimand. When you say no and that decreases the behavior, technically that's a punishment, right? By definition. Yes. Or a response cost. If you remove something, okay, you took that toy away, so now I'm going to take that. That is technically, by definition, a punishment. And yes. So I think that when individuals on social media are putting out terms like, hey, don't use punishment, I think that's really, really misleading. And again, going back to this whole idea of creating this increased anxiety in parenting, right? And so again, I think I walk away from social media if I didn't know the knowledge that I had. Well, what am I supposed to do? Just follow these like beautiful scripts and everything's going to be okay? Because I think that that's the dark side, is nothing is being offered to say, hey, parents, like this is what you can try in this particular context, right? And so again, I think that just adds to anxiety. And then parents behind the scenes are then battling each other saying, well, I saw this and, you shouldn't be doing that. And then there's this judgment and mom shaming. And it's just so toxic.
It is very toxic. And I think, it's very toxic. It creates a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of parent shaming out there. If you do timeout, you are harming your child, when we have absolutely no research showing that timeout has harmful effects. In fact, we have a lot of research showing that, timeout can be an effective strategy that doesn't have a negative impact on the parent-child relationship. And I think another issue is that a lot of what is put out there on social media is very unrealistic. I know as a parent to 3 kids myself that it is impossible to be calm all the time. And, there's a lot of talk about, co-regulation and being with your children with their big feelings. But if I am not calm myself, I can't help my child to regulate themselves. So, I think a lot of it is recognizing what is realistic for parents. And sometimes, you do need that timeout to calm yourself down. I know for myself, seeing sibling fighting is a big trigger for me. I don't like to see my kids hurting each other. It's very, very hard for me. So that is the one behavior in our house that leads to timeout is sibling fighting, because honestly, I need that moment to calm down, because when I've seen, my 3-year-old hurt the baby, my mom, rage is just going to boil. And I need that moment to calm down. And if I'm there trying to regulate him and I'm dysregulated, like I'm not helping anybody. So I think, part of it is recognizing what's realistic. And a lot of, I think research helps us to figure that out, because a lot of this research are based on these parenting interventions that have been done, with thousands upon thousands of parents. So that helps us know, okay, well, this approach like actually has been used by parents in a way that, kind of fits with what's realistic as a parent. And otherwise it's just one person's opinion, and that one person could have very different children than you have. And that's not going to really apply to your kids.
Exactly. That makes me think of the quote, and I don't know who said it, but a dysregulated parent is not going to regulate a dysregulated child. And I think that that's really important to remember is, in a moment of frustration, I always say it's okay to walk away if you don't know what to do and you're too overwhelmed. It's better to do that and collect yourself, because you're also modeling that for your children.
Yes.
And so I'm glad that you brought that up. And our last kind of question or myth busting is the whole idea of gentle parenting. In the world of psychology, we have these evidence-based treatment packages, specifically, that are more geared towards parents with children that are having severe disruptive behaviors. And these have been researched and well-researched and replicated and continue to be researched. But is gentle parenting one of those? And what is gentle parenting?
Yeah, so I see this a lot in parenting social media accounts, talk about gentle parenting or conscious parenting. And I will admit, I think that the idea behind it is really nice. We should respect our children. We should treat them as human beings. And I could not agree more with that premise of, children are human beings who deserve respect. It's not, they shouldn't be seen or heard, old school approach. They deserve to have a voice. They deserve to be seen, be a part of our family. And, but where I have issues with the gentle parenting, the conscious parenting movement is they present these ideas such as, all consequences are harmful, and kind of make sweeping generalizations. And I think a big issue is that there is no research focusing on gentle parenting as it is defined by social media, if that makes sense, or conscious parenting. What the research has supported is a style of parenting called authoritative parenting, which is this idea, that kind of takes some from gentle parenting and some from the old school parenting, this idea that we're warm and loving and respectful to our children, but still hold these firm boundaries. We still give consequences when needed. And while still being focused on providing positive support over negative support. So, there's also positive parenting in research, which is this idea that we're focusing on, paying attention to the positive behaviors and rewarding and praising the positive behaviors over, doing that more often than we are giving consequences and punishing our children. So there is support for that, but in the research and, all the parenting interventions are really a combination of this being respectful and loving plus using consequences and boundaries.
I think that's such a lovely way to describe sort of what we know as like the core principles of parenting that supports healthy development right there, what you said. And so thank you for that. I think you boiled it down very quickly.
Of course.
I think that this is one of the topics we could go on and on and on about. And I know that you had a list of other topics we could discuss, so we'd love to have you back for a second episode. But please share with our audience where they can find more information about you.
Yes. So I, on my Instagram account and my website, what I do is I translate recent parenting research, which basically means I just take the articles that are out there and break them down into, what does this mean for you as a parent in your day to day? So my Instagram is at Parenting Translator and my website is www.parentingtranslator.com.
And Cara, you have a book out there as well. Do you want to share a little bit more about your book?
Yes. So I have a book for children. So it's designed to be read to your children, what to do when you feel like hitting. And the idea is, that research really shows what is helpful to children is to know, what are their replacement behaviors? What should they be doing instead? Because a lot of times when children hit or are aggressive, it's out of a need. For example, they want the toy from their sibling, but they don't have the social skills to be able to communicate that need. So helping children to learn, more adaptive behaviors that they can use instead of hitting or using aggression when they feel that way. And, after having 3 toddlers myself, I know how extremely common aggression is and that it is a skill that children need to learn over those toddler years.
Yeah. We will add all of that to our show notes. Thank you again for joining us today.
Of course. So happy to.